Well, it was an interesting thing. After my father died, my mother was living in Seal Beach, and there was a meeting that she wanted to attend down in Palm Springs. So I took off work and drove her down for the meeting. And I don't know, I guess I spoke up and said something. And the next thing I know is that we have an election, our regular yearly election. And I got a call the next day saying that I had been elected as a member of the tribal council. Well, I was absolutely floored. I couldn't believe it. So that was my start in our local politics.
She transformed this tribe in a way that no one can deny. And the ramifications of her efforts here in Palm Springs had many impacts across the country, because what she was doing here was setting in motion guidelines for modern governance that would lead to economic development, which is what the tribes desperately needed. And she transformed this tribe into one of the richest tribes in the country by virtue of her efforts.
I grew up in Palm Springs, California. I was born in 1921, and I was born in Section 14, which is right in downtown Palm Springs now. And my parents had a motor court there, and I just grew up with kids and going to school, just a regular life. It was interesting because of the fact that I had joined the Republican Women's Club and was an officer. And I was used to very much of a well-run thing. And down here, we didn't have a constitution. We didn't have bylaws. We didn't have anything. We just had meetings. That was that. And that was a shocker to me, that we didn't have any of that.
There was never a tribal attorney before Mrs. Ortner got involved with the tribe. The first year that she was on the tribal council, she paid for the attorney out of her own funds, knowing the necessity for having legal counsel to go through the thicket of all of the regulations that the government had developed around Indian land. And she was determined to maximize this sole asset. It was the land and the natural resources. You have to remember that this is before the gaming came in. And so Mrs. Ortner knew that if they had any chance of building a better future for their tribe, it was to maximize the land.
The Section 14 became a very bad slum. And because of we didn't have leasing. We didn't have any leases. So we would have some people would say, "Oh yeah, you could come and be on my land. You can live on my land." So then it became very congested, and it was not a good site.
If you only leased a land for let's say a parcel for 5 years for a residence or 10 years for agricultural purposes, you get a clientele there that's not going to stay very long, and so they don't put enough in to the land to make it really develop. Just imagine if somebody is only going to be on your property for 5 years with a house, they bring trailers or they'll bring a tent. They're not going to bring substantial property investment into the land. And the same thing with if they're planting trees or they're planting other types of crops, they're not going to take it as seriously as if you are putting a long-term investment in, and so you really put a lot of infrastructure in. And that's what somebody was not willing to do, is that there were people who say, well, wow, we could really develop Palm Springs, but we don't have access to long enough leasing laws. And so in her case, she wanted to change that, and she was going straight for 99 years. She wanted 99-year leasing, and that had been used in other contexts, 99 years. And at first the government, nope, we're not doing 99 years. She just kept plugging away. She got the first 25 years. With a renewal of another 25 years for a maximum of 50. So the first long-term leasing law it's called Public Law 255, And that was put through first, and then she was right back to work testifying before Congress. You can just imagine Mrs. Ortner with the other tribal council members going to Washington, D.C., arguing that they needed, there's one interesting concept that she presents to Congress where she says, we need vitamin money. We don't need vitamin B, we need vitamin money. And so we have to develop our land, and we can't do that unless we rewrite the leasing laws.
That was quite an achievement for our tribe to do that, and through that we were able to eventually build a spa hotel downtown and a bathhouse, and everything turned around with being able to lease your land and get developers to come in and to help and to do all that. So it was an opening for our tribe through that hard work. The thing that really makes me extremely proud, too, is that with the conditions that we have in Washington today, that we had no lobbyists, and we had just 8 attorney and we 5 women, and so that was quite an accomplishment. One of the things that I'm very proud of as a tribal member is that I was able to get, with the help of my council, the reasons why we needed a constitution and bylaws. And that was an exciting time, because we literally went around to the different homes and explained about a constitution and bylaws, because the men were not very happy with us, because we turned out to be an all-woman tribal council. And we thought that this was a good idea, which it was a wonderful thing. It gave us a way to organize and to have respect in the community and everything, that we were not just letting things go by and helter-skelter. They took the position that we listened to the city and too much. And it was, you have to listen to learn to make a right decision. We didn't always agree with the city or do what the city wanted us to do, but we had this relationship to where we could talk about it and discuss it. And the men just didn't think we should be doing all, we shouldn't be talking to the city that much. It was just one of those little things that we had to overcome. The city has helped us at different times when we needed help with our legislators in Sacramento and in Washington, D.C. So it became a good working relationship that continues to this day. I don't think the men ever really have gotten over all the women, the strong women.
As opposed to the traditional style of the male tribal leaders. They were very closed, they were very inward, they weren't trusting of the government, they didn't want to work with the city of Palm Springs, very averse to this. And they had to work together. I mean, the way the land is constructed, the reservation land inside the city limits of Palm Springs, bear in mind the book describes how 7,000 acres of the city limits are tribal land. That's huge. So that has to be managed somehow, and you have to interface with the city somehow. And because of her willingness to stretch out a hand, she was able to accomplish these things. And she said, there's a very interesting quote in the book where she says, because I was a half-breed, I was able to do this. I was willing to reach across, because her father was white, he's European ancestry, her mother was Agua, Caliente, Cahuilla, and they married here, and they settled here, and Mrs. Ortner was brought up in those two cultures. And so to her, it wasn't something alien to do. And it was actually the asset that allowed her to achieve the momentous things she did?
I've always been a person that if there's a job to do, you do it. You know, if you're elected to do the job, that's, if you're going to sweep the floor, you'd have the cleanest floor. And so whatever it was, we just did it. No, I think I didn't have any apprehensions about not doing this or advancing.
The modern Palm Springs that we know today is a result of what that 5 women tribal council did, because they reached across the aisle, so to speak, and they worked with the city to come up with new zoning, with new rights of way, with new plans for infrastructure, new plans for ganging aspects of the reservation together for specific needs. The sentiment before was very distrusting, like, we're not going to, I mean, look at, let's bottom line, let's look at it this way. The reservation represents a very small portion of what the Native Americans once had. Let's face it, that's true. On the other hand, Mrs. Ortner's attitude was, okay, we can sit around and we can be bitter that we had so much of our land taken, or we can get together and work and really maximize the assets we do have. And she did that and made the Agua Caliente Cahuilla the richest tribe in the nation.